Mr Limbrick.
Thank you, Deputy President. And I'd like to thank Dr Ratnam for putting forward this motion and giving me the chance again to talk about energy policy, which I love so much. And also the chance, I know that lots of your supporters will be watching, so I relish the chance to address them as well. And I'd love to hear what they have to think about this. So, yeah, oh well, that's great. So there's one big flaw with this motion, and the main flaw is that all of the talk is around greenhouse gas emissions, but the motion is talking about 100% renewable energy. It's not talking about greenhouse gas emissions at all. It's talking about renewable energy. It's ignoring technologies, as Mr. Rich Phillips has already outlined. Now, one of the interesting things, there's a really interesting website called electricitymap.org. If you haven't seen it, I'd suggest you go and have a look. And what it shows you is a map of the world that you can zoom in on, and you can look at different places in the world in real time and how much carbon emissions they're producing according to their electricity. So if I look at Victoria right now, it's terrible. It's 674 grams per kilowatt hour of electricity, and most of that is coal, as we already know. This is similar to Uttar Pradesh in India, and also Poland, who also rely heavily on coal. If we look at, and it's a very dark brown colour, you know, the dark brown colour means lots of carbon emissions and the green colour means not much carbon emissions, right? Well, black means really bad. It's very high carbon emissions. But if we look at South Australia, which was called out by Dr Ratnam in a speech before, South Australia is not a green colour. It's sort of a mucky brown colour, and it's showing 290 grams of carbon CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. And at the moment, as we see in most places that try for a mostly renewable strategy, it's mostly relying on gas right now in South Australia, not renewables at all. But if we zoom out to the rest of the world, way beyond our shores, we just see that there are some green places in the world right now. One of them is France. They've been green for decades. And of course, they're 67 grams. So they're 90% lower carbon emissions than Victoria.
Where are you going here?
I wonder where I'm going. And of course, if we look at their power production, it's because of nuclear energy. And another place, let's have a look at another one, Sweden, in the Nordic country, you know, yes, Sweden. And again, mostly nuclear and hydro. And in fact, this is throughout the world. If you look at green anywhere on the map, what you will see is that places that have deeply decarbonised their electricity grid use a combination of either hydroelectric or nuclear energy. That's it. The places that go for very high renewables penetration inevitably end up relying on gas or other things. Now, renewables are not incompatible with nuclear energy. In fact, Ontario, Canada, again, another green one on this map, they have pretty high renewables. So they, at the moment, but again, they have very high nuclear energy output. They're actually one of the lowest in the world, 36 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. That's pretty much the best in the world at the moment. And they have a very small amount of gas that they use to, you know, back up their renewables as they go up and down, as the sun goes up and down and the wind goes up and down. But they mostly rely on nuclear for the rest of it, and some hydro. So, you know, this is what we've seen around the world. But, okay, so we have these two technologies that we know the evidence has shown us that around the world have deeply decarbonised electricity grids, hydroelectricity and nuclear. Now, if we let's look at hydro first. The Greens have a long history with hydroelectricity. In fact, they started opposing hydroelectricity. That was where they were born from, right? The Greens party in Tasmania, the Franklin River project, like this was where they started opposing hydroelectricity. Tasmania would have had far lower carbon emissions if the Greens had never opposed that. I mean, this is a fact, and that scared governments around Australia for such a long time that no one's put up large-scale hydroelectric projects ever since. They've just been terrified of what happened. 2.0, yeah, I mean, that's an upgrade of something that happened in the 50s, but there's no one's flooding forests and stuff, and we don't really want to flood forests, you know, because it was a big deal, right? But then in the 1990s, in 1998, federally, again, we had there was a lot of talk about nuclear at the time and earlier, and it has been for a long time. But in 1998, the Greens collaborated or conspired with the Australian Democrats, and this was actually under a Liberal government. I don't know why they didn't stop this, but they didn't for whatever reason. The Greens and the Democrats conspired to put in a prohibition on nuclear energy federally that prohibited any new nuclear reactors. And so we've got this situation where the two best technologies that we know, the evidence shows us, will decarbonise electricity grids around the world, have been effectively either stopped through protest or prohibited by the Greens. Now, this just seems absolutely crazy to me. Now, people can change their mind on these things. I used to be anti-nuclear, believe it or not. And as Edward de Bono once said, I've changed my mind about lots of things. If you can't change your mind, why have one? Now, I changed my mind about nuclear. Let me tell you a little story. Back in 2011, I've probably told this story before, but anyway, I'll tell it for the new audience that's watching today. Back in 2011, you'll know that there was a very terrible event that happened in Japan, the Fukushima earthquake and resultant tsunami and nuclear disaster. And I had a very vested interest in paying very close attention to this because I have my in-laws live in Japan, I used to live in Japan, and I had a lot of friends in Japan, and I was worried. I studied physics at university, but I didn't know anything about nuclear radiation and its effects on the human body and all of that sort of stuff. I had no idea. And they start showing all these things on the television, becquerels, microbecquerels, no one knows what the hell it means. Like, the nuclear technicians are really bad at communicating this sort of stuff, right? Yeah, the engineers, they're not very good at communicating. They're smart guys, but they're not good at communicating this sort of stuff. And so I started researching, like, is my family actually in danger? And, you know, they were worried, like, they're buying masks to try and block out the radiation particles, and they're doing all this sort of stuff. And I was worried too, like I'm doing researching on masks and all this sort of stuff, and I did all this research, and what I came to the conclusion after looking at all of the research of effects on radiation and what happens according to different levels of radiation. You know, they've got radiation monitors everywhere in Japan, right? So they've got public websites, you can go to the local council and you can see, you know, what's the current radiation level? And there was a spike, you know, you could see it. There was a spike, but you look at the radiation level on that and you go, well, what does that actually mean? And what I discovered is that I would have got a higher radiation dose getting in a plane and flying over there than I would have had if I was there. You get radiation just from going up high in the atmosphere, from, you know, it's natural cosmic radiation. It goes into the plane and you get a radiation dose. And in fact, if you look at air hostesses, they'll get actually quite a high radiation dose. Flight attendants, yep. They'll get a reasonably high radiation dose compared to people who work on the ground just because of that. But it's not particularly dangerous to them. It's a well-known risk, and they manage it really well. And if we look at what the countries that have had the most successful decarbonisations in history, we can look at, okay, France and Sweden. When they introduced nuclear power in the late 70s, they were both largely decarbonised within a decade. If we look at other countries that have attempted very large-scale renewables programs, like Germany, and if you look at Germany on the map, that won't be a green country, it'll be a sort of a light brown colour, a bit better than South Australia maybe, but they've spent hundreds of billions of dollars on renewables, and they still have much higher carbon emissions than France, but their electricity is 1.7 times more expensive than in Germany. So, I mean, this is crazy. And these other ideas about, you know, people see nuclear as some sort of left-right issue, or only, you know, libertarians and conservatives support nuclear for some reason. But that's just not true. If you look at Finland, the Finland Greens recently, in 2018, changed their position to pro-nuclear because they care about the environment and they were enlightened. If you look in Australia, you look at some of the unions, CFMEU, you know, people talk about just transition. Why don't we listen to the workers? The CFMEU have said, they put in a submission to the inquiry, this is from the Victorian Secretary, that states in quite incredible detail on what they want to do out in the Latrobe Valley. You look at in the federal inquiry, AWU, they they put in a submission, all sorts of information about the types of things that they want to work on and want to build. Like, these are the workers themselves that are talking about this. So there's many people within the Labor movement and the Labor Party, I guess, that support this. And if we look at, sorry? Well, you know, they've got some great ideas. And this other idea that, you know, you can't be an environmentalist and pro-nuclear. I mean, that's just wrong. The environmental movement all over the world, if you look at it at the moment, especially in America, there are lots of environmentalists that have changed their mind on this issue. They are saying, we need to look at this issue because there is a big problem. You know, they say, you know, climate emergency. I don't like the term emergency, but, you know, I agree. There's a problem, right? There's something that needs to be done. And so this is what they're looking at. People are looking at this. This is not something, you know, environmentalists aren't all 100% renewables people, right? They've got divergent views. They're a diverse group of people. And so
it'll be an interesting inquiry.
It'll be an interesting inquiry. I assure you, if it passes, of course assuming that.
China's not on the map.
I don't know. I don't think they release their data. They're not big in releasing data. But I'll conclude. I won't go on. I could go on all day, but I won't. I know there's other speakers. But nuclear power is the safest and most efficient source of electricity because of the highest energy density. It can operate 24/7 at 90% capacity factor. And yeah, according to studies in The Lancet, it's actually the safest way to make reliable electricity. That's in terms of deaths per terawatt hour produced. Nuclear is a clean, safe power that, with the help of renewables, it can cooperate with renewable energy, can underpin a 100% carbon-free future. And I urge the Green supporters to get real about decarbonisation. Nuclear is a real and rare chance for you to be agents of change. As I am not afraid of looking at this issue, I want to investigate it. I accept some of Mr. Rich Phillips' points that some of these issues that are the preamble of the motion may or may not be correct, but they're not really the meat of what we're looking at in the inquiry. We're looking at, you know, what's required for 100% renewables. Let's look at it. Let's see how much it costs. Let's get to the bottom of it. I'll support the motion. Thank you.
Hear, hear.